Hey, I'm Dave, and on this installment of Summit Racing Quick Flicks, we're going to help you diagnose some common starter issues. Now, before you really start to focus in on your starter as the culprit for your engine cranking over slowly or not cranking over at all, you should really start with other aspects of your electrical system. So we recommend that you look at the battery first and foremost. Make sure you've got enough charge to crank over your starter. Usually it takes about 9.6 volts at least to crank over a starter. So there's a couple ways you can test your battery. You can just kind of try to crank over your engine. If you have a friend, kind of look at the headlights and tell you if they dim or not. If the headlights dim as you're trying to crank over the engine, that's usually a sign of a poor battery or a bad alternator that's not recharging the battery properly. Another way to do it is to use one of these voltmeters. You hook it up to your battery and you test the voltage on your engine or on your battery. As I mentioned, it takes about 9.6 volts typically to crank over a starter. A properly working battery should register in around 12.6, 12.7 volts. So if you're dropping below that, below say 12.4 volts when you consider the power needed to crank over your starter as well as power other accessories, you're going to want to change your battery. So 12.4 or lower, we'd recommend that you consider that. You're also going to want to look at other aspects of your charging system. If the battery has the right charge, it could be the cables. If the cables aren't working properly or in bad condition, it won't deliver the proper charge. If your terminals are corroded, also that would prevent the proper charge from being delivered to your starter and cranking over your engine. One other area of note to look at within your electrical system, if your engine's cranking over slowly or not at all, would be the relays and fuses. If you find yourself trying to turn your ignition on and you don't even hear a clicking sound, oftentimes that can be traced back to a fuse. So you're going to want to go ahead and investigate that particular area. Having said that, if the rest of your electrical system checks out, you can then sort of turn your attention to the starter. And oftentimes, if your engine's cranking over slowly or not at all, there's often three areas within your starter that we like to start with to look at. And number one is the mounting surface, the mounting block surface. There's excessive oil or paint on there. You won't get a proper ground, and that can cause your starter to not operate properly. Now, if everything in the rest of your electrical system checks out, there's a few other areas now on your starter that we'll look at to begin with if your vehicle is turning over slowly or not at all. Starting with the mounting surface, if there's excessive paint or oil there on the starter mounting block surface, you won't get a proper ground, and that can cause your starter to malfunction or not work or work slowly. What about neutral safety switch? If your vehicle is equipped with one of those, if that's not working properly, again, your starter won't work properly. So what we'll recommend is you hook a jumper wire up from the neutral safety switch terminal to the main terminal on the starter. And then if you turn the key and it works, at that point, then you have a faulty neutral safety switch, and that is the culprit for the problem. Finally, have you matched up your starter with your application? Generally, vehicles with 11:1 compression or higher require a high torque starter to crank over, and so you're going to need to look at your engine, make sure you've bought the right starter in the first place to get your engine cranked over. Now, aside from not starting or not cranking your engine over quickly enough, the second most common thing we hear from customers is that their starter is not engaging or disengaging properly. Basically, we'll have you start at the mounting point on this one. Due to variances from different manufacturers of starters, the mounting is going to be a little bit different. So if you're having a starter that's engaging too harshly, we'll often have you install more shims at the mounting point. Or if it's not catching enough during the engagement process, it's not catching enough teeth on the flywheel, we'll have you remove shims at the mounting point. And you just kind of have to go back and forth there to get the proper engagement or disengagement. Also, you have to look at, depending on the vehicle manufacturer, whether it's Ford or Chevy, there's some variances there too. Depending on the transmission used in Ford applications, there are different types of offset starters, so you need to make sure you selected the right starter for your Ford transmission. By the same token, with Chevys, there's different types of flywheels, most commonly 153 tooth and 168 tooth flywheels. And again, you need to make sure that you selected the right starter for that application. Another thing we'll hear from customers is that their starter installed properly, was working fine, and then failed fairly shortly after installation. There's three areas we'll have you look at here, starting with going back to what we said about having the right starter for your engine's compression. Again, 11-to-1 compression or higher, you need a high torque starter in those applications. If you don't have that, you probably wore your starter out. Number two, go back and look at the mounting points that we talked about earlier. If you've got paint or some sort of grease or any type of excess buildup at the starting point, you're not going to have a proper ground. This will cause your starter to pull excessive amps and then burn out early. Finally, the last thing you'll need to look at in this case is the relationship between where your starter is mounted and your headers. If it's too close, you're going to get heat soak from excessive heat from your headers, and that will cause your starter to fail early as well. So you either need to find a different location for your starter or maybe add a heat shield to your starter, and that'll solve the problem. The last couple issues we're going to discuss revolve around the fitment of the starter within your application. Oftentimes we'll have customers call up and say that their starter will not bolt up properly, and a lot of times this happens to be Chevy customers, and that's because Chevy uses inline and staggered mounting patterns for their starter, so you need to make sure that you have the right starter for that particular application. Another common complaint or issue that we hear would be that the starter does not fit with the headers that the customer has, and for those particular instances you need a starter with a clockable mounting block to help you sort of mount the starter and make it work with your header. So you need to experiment with the different positions on the clockable mounting block on your starter to make that starter work. And if that doesn't work, you need to move to an adjustable mounting block starter to make the starter work with your particular engine and header setup. Now, if you've got more questions on starters or any other technical questions, be sure to leave a comment in the comment section below, and be sure to watch any of our other quick flick videos.